Hey, well, what's up, guys? Welcome back to The Collision. Daniel here, excited to talk about some Star Wars. 12-year-old me can't believe we got a show on the book of Boba Fett. Current day me is still not sure exactly how I feel about this show, so let's talk about it. So doing a review of a full season of a show is obviously more complicated than reviewing a movie or a condensed hour and 45-minute runtime. A lot of stuff happens on the episodes. We can't go through each one, but I wanted to talk about Star Wars. I love Star Wars. Grew up loving Star Wars. Star Wars was the first live-action show or movie I saw growing up as a kid, so it's always had a special place in my heart. And I know I'm not alone in that. And Boba Fett, one of those characters that, especially as if you kind of came to Star Wars young, one of those famed kind of legendary characters that doesn't do a whole lot, but kind of his fandom exceeds his actual role in the film. So this was a show, obviously, I was looking forward to. Star Wars kind of kicked off their live action streaming TV shows with The Mandalorian. 2 seasons were both fantastic. So expectations were pretty high for Boba Fett. And in the end, it's a complicated. I have mixed emotions on this show, and I maybe the best way to say it is that this is an enjoyable mess of a TV show. There are some serious problems with this show. There's things that I have a hard time kind of wrapping my mind around. Some of the decisions that were made definitely didn't kind of hit the same way, at least for me. That's something like The Mandalorian did. Yet I still was excited every time Wednesday rolled around and a new episode. I watched this with my family every week, and it was fun. We enjoyed it. We talk about it after. I text my brother and talk about it. So I'm kind of have mixed emotions with this. I think there's as a show this thing is somewhat of a disaster. There's some weird stuff going on that we'll get into. But at least for me, and obviously everyone has different have different opinions on this. There was enough kind of good Star Wars goodness, nostalgia, and just scenes and stuff to where I did enjoy watching this, even if I think it is nowhere near kind of the level of just sort of a well-made, crafted show like The Mandalorian. And probably I would say the best parallel for me, as far as like the movies for the show, is this is kind of like the Han Solo movie. It's exciting. There's some kind of good stuff in it. I don't hate that movie. It's fun to see kind of classic Star Wars stuff. But you also kind of, as you're watching, things just don't seem to be quite as exciting as you maybe envisioned they would. It's kind of seeing this character that you thought would be fun, that you used to love, kind of back in the day, isn't quite as awesome as you thought maybe it would, to kind of really get deep into who they are. And some of it just doesn't. Some of it's kind of a slog. Obviously, there's a bunch of memes with like the speeder bike chase in one of the episodes that just seemed kind of slow and kind of uninspired, and that sort of kind of carries throughout the whole show, obviously mixed in with some really great high highs. But for the most part, I wouldn't say this is a show of a lot of lows. This isn't just, I didn't hate the episodes. They just sort of were blah. A lot of it just sort of happened, a lot of talking, a lot of stuff that is hard to kind of get a finger on. Like, what are the stakes? Who are the villains? Okay, the Pikes, they're fighting. Who are they? How many are there? Who's their leader? Who's working for who? The show just sort of kind of slogs along without really getting into establishing enough to, and obviously lacking like a Baby Yoda Grogu character, just sort of lacked that kind of attachment for the audience to get invested beyond just, hey, this is a character that I used to like, that's cool, let's sort of see what happens. I just never really felt emotionally invested in the story, even if I was excited to get kind of my weekly dose fix of some live action Star Wars. So I thought for this review, just sort of look at 2 areas. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff we could talk about, kind of going on the show. But I think maybe the two areas that kind of make or break this show, and I think in both senses, areas, there's some good and the bad, is kind of the structure of the show and the characters. And I thought we'd talk about the structure first, because I think a lot of what happens with the characters, for good or bad, kind of comes from the structure. And it's hard to, kind of looking back on, now that we've had all 7 episodes of this show, it's hard to put a finger on kind of what the vision was for the show. It seemed, in a lot of ways, it seemed like there was a writer's room, and there was about 3 or 4 kind of different ideas and pitches for this show. And rather than just sort of grasping one and just sort of going real deep into that, it seemed like they tried to kind of do all of them. This show is very scattered. Obviously, the most evident way or easiest way to see that is this, taking the 2 episodes before the finale and totally going off to a different character and a different storyline and kind of checking in and setting up the other shows, which is just a bizarre kind of decision from a kind of show running standpoint. But even beyond that, because I've heard people kind of counter that, saying, "Hey, it's just you're getting tripped up by the title just because it says Book of Boba Fett. It doesn't mean he has to be in all of it. They're telling a bigger story, And I get that, but I think even like if they called this like Tatooine Tales or some other like Mando's Adventures or whatever they called it, the problem with that isn't just that they kind of went away from the main story for 2 entire episodes with their title character not even speaking or really barely making an appearance. The problem is that they weren't doing that throughout the start of the season. I think I almost forgot that this show started off with a bunch of flashbacks of the Tusken Raiders, and it seemed like they were trying to kind of connect his, that moment to real time and these conflicting time or kind of 2 different timelines going together. And, I think the intention was to kind of show the lessons he learned there to be more noble and, less selfish. And he was going to carry that on to him in present time. But then they move away from the flashbacks, from those Tusken Raider scenes. And other than sort of a callback in the finale, which is largely inconsequential to the actual story, they don't really do anything with that. It's hard to draw a connection between, hey, this is what he learned there, and you can kind of see how that impacted him in real time. And I think part of the problem with that is just that there's very little kind of screen time given to real time in the show. You get most of it is flashbacks, kind of what happened then, and then the later half of the show is mostly going off and telling Mando's story and checking in on Luke and Grogu and Ahsoka. And there's really just sort of a snail's pace of now and then you get some real time of Boba Fett kind of walking around and trying to recruit people for his team to fight. But you just don't get a whole lot to kind of see real, in present day kind of timeline Boba Fett, and this makes for a very kind of whiplashy show that it's hard to kind of figure out what they were going for. And I think, I think that part of the reason why I think I found it hard to really connect and be invested in the story is because there just wasn't a whole lot of story, or maybe there was too many stories going that it's hard to kind of know what the main idea is. But the flip side of the structure, if that's kind of the bad, if this show is really kind of more a collection of scenes and moments rather than any kind of cohesive, unified story, kind of the flip side of that is that some of those moments and scenes are fantastic. There are some, and I think that's kind of the redeeming factor for me with this show is that, I think early on I kind of just accepted, hey, this is not going to really be a super engaging kind of narratively story or thematically. There's not going to be any kind of unifying threads that go throughout. This is just going to be kind of check in, almost like a monster of the week. You sort of just check in and kind of get a few scenes and stuff that maybe don't tie into the overall story. This sort of moments. And, that obviously hurt the overall story, but some of those scenes are great. That train scene, when they're taking that on is, live action Star Wars at its best. It's exciting. It's cool. It's really kind of digging into the stuff that at least I love about the Star Wars world. Obviously, episodes 5 and 6, where they completely abandon Boba Fett and the story they've been telling, and go check in with Mando and set up season 3, and set up Ahsoka and all that. I think episode 6 is maybe some of the best Star Wars that is being put to screen since Return of the Jedi. Obviously, people are conflicted maybe about the appearance of Luke or how they did his voice, or the fact that it doesn't tie into the overall story. There's no Boba Fett, but just taking it as like an isolated kind of collection of these moments and kind of tiebacks to the original trilogy and to the animated shows and to the sequel trilogy and to the prequels, and how they were able to kind of unify all the things, all the eras of Star Wars. I thought it was brilliant. I thought that was well done. If you can just sort of forget that it's a complete detour and derailing the story that's being told, there are some great moments in this. I think the Rancor at the end, 14-year-old me would be losing his mind. Current day me was losing my mind, seeing a Rancor walking through the streets and, eating people and this causing destruction. My kids were enjoying that as we were watching it. That's just awesome. That's just awesome Star Wars. That still we're spoiled to be getting that and still can be complaining about maybe that the show wasn't as good. as we thought it would be. But I think even the Rancor is kind of an encapsulation of the good and the bad of sort of the structure of this show, where that moment is awesome. But when you think of sort of how they got to that moment, it's just sort of a lot of plot that they sort of threw in there in order to set up one moment at the end. They introduced the Hutts, who seem like they're going to be kind of these twins, these siblings. Maybe they're going to be a big part of the show. And really, it seems like they were only introduced so that they could give Boba Fett his pet Rancor as sort of an apology. And then they introduced the Rancor in that one episode. And then they don't check on it again. So you sort of forget that it's there until the end. And see, a lot of episode time was given to these kind of meaningless or at least inconsequential plot points just to get to this great moment of Star Wars. And to me, at least, that's sort of the encapsulation of, I think, the good and the bad of what the show is doing. Maybe the characters, obviously this is a show, Boba Fett's name is in the title. One of the questions kind of going into this show is, how do you take a character that barely spoke, barely appeared, didn't have really a whole lot of backstory? I guess they give him a little bit in the prequels. I think the one job that this show really needed to do was to make sure that they kept Boba Fett just sort of the baddest guy in the galaxy, just real cool. Don't make him silly, don't overdo it. And I don't know. For me, it's hard to kind of come away from the show thinking that they accomplished that. Again, some of the decisions, kind of like the structure, seems somewhat baffling. It's a character that's known almost exclusively for how cool he is in his armor. But then in the show, he's barely in his armor. He's mostly without his helmet. A character that's kind of known for just not talking, shooting first, and not asking questions. And he's barely has many action scenes himself, and a lot of just sort of talking and walking around trying to recruit people to do his join his team to fight the Pikes. And I think that kind of overall is just sort of a bit of a demystifying of him. I think he was, at least for me, he was a lot more consistent, I guess, with what I imagined him being in The Mandalorian when he appeared, when he was just sort of still real tough and didn't appear a whole lot. But in the show where you just sort of have him walking around without his helmet, in some ways he's kind of a doofus. He doesn't, he's kind of bumbling along trying to lead this new kind of crime, being a crime lord, and kind of ruling and not making a whole lot of decisions that turn out well. Most of the time, he's kind of recruiting other people to accomplish what he's doing. And I think he kind of gets sidelined in his own story. And Fennec is sort of the one, kind of the dual characters that are supposed to kind of lead this show, kind of suffers the same fate. She's mostly sidelined. She doesn't do a whole lot other than kind of now and then she gets an action scene. And I think you even see that in the finale, that she's sent away at the very start of the finale. That's, one of the main characters, and doesn't really appear again until she does something in the very end. And just sort of both of these kind of main characters end up being kind of almost secondary characters to all these other people that they recruited that are less interesting. And just even their relationship to each other just isn't given enough time to kind of develop and have any sort of connection. And it's kind of hard to feel like that the Boba Fett we have now after a show, 7 episodes of him, is sort of an improvement, or that we got to really know him better, and that he's that he's going to be the same kind of cool character that inspires like a new generation of kids to want to be Boba Fett and how cool he is. He just sort of seems like a bumbling old guy that's just sort of going around as a side character in his own show. So again, I think overall that was one of the big concerns going in, and I think a lot of what we got sort of justifies the concerns of maybe some of these characters just aren't suited to be sort of the main character in their own show. So let me know, kind of overall, like I said, maybe it seems like I'm mostly negative about the show. I enjoyed watching it every week. I was excited to, when Wednesday came along and it was a new episode, and we'd sit down and we'd eat dinner on the couch. We make we'd make kind of an event of it with my family, and to me, that's what Star Wars is all about. It's sort of the generational thing that brings everyone together. And as I was watching the episodes, I wasn't, sitting there shaking my head and, no, this is terrible. They're ruining Star Wars. How dare they do it to Boba Fett? I was enjoying it. I was enjoying it for what it was. But it's just not a show that I was ever really thinking about for very long, like after the episode was done or the next day, or that I would if kind of think kind of the big moments that really stood out in Boba Fett, it's hard to think of any that you want to like, oh, I need to go back and watch this episode, because that was just such a great moment, and there's so much. Maybe episode 6, the episodes without Boba Fett. Some of those I think you can kind of rewatch and really kind of are a very high. But as far as like Boba Fett and his story and what's going on, just none of it really hit. None of it was super exciting, even if it was enjoyable. And even I think it's fitting that they kind of end the finale sort of back with Mando launching off, and a lot of this sort of felt like it was just sort of, it was tiding us over till Mando season 3. Which will be kind of more weighty and it's just sort of buying us time until they finish making the new season. So overall, I enjoyed it. Didn't love it, but as a Star Wars fan that's just excited to be getting a daily fix of or a weekly kind of dose of Star Wars, that's about all I really needed this show to be. But let me know what you guys think. Obviously, I think Mando is almost universally kind of loved, and everyone loves Baby Yoda and Mandalorian character and the music and everything. This show seems like it's a lot more divisive, or just different opinions, kind of more of a range of people that loved it, thought it was awesome, people that just hated it, and then people like me that is just sort of flying in their starship somewhere in the middle there. So let me know where you fall in that spectrum. Love to talk about this. If any kind of individual stuff in the show or episodes that stood out to you, let's talk about it. One of the best things about Star Wars is watching it, and the next best thing is talking about it afterwards. So let's have a conversation with that. Thanks, guys, for checking out this review. If you haven't done so, encourage you subscribe to our channel, like the video, join with what we're doing here at The Collision. Got a lot more stuff coming up in this year, and we'd just love to have you guys be a part of it. But thanks, guys. Stay safe and continue to collide with your world for Christ.